Hello, I'm Mark Dewar and I'm a partner at Charles Russell Speechlys, specialising in supply chain risk and regulation. Today, as part of our series on supply chains, I'll be talking about how to deal with ESG regulatory uncertainty in supply chain contracts. It's no secret that ESG laws and regulations are in a state of rapid development and flux. There's a steady stream of new ESG-related rules and standards coming into force. New ESG disclosure standards for companies are imminent in the UK and in many other jurisdictions around the world, as governments incorporate into their national laws the Global Baseline Reporting Standard recently launched by the International Sustainability Standards Board. In the UK, we also have new statutory guidance that raises expectations for companies reporting under the Modern Slavery Act and a new extended producer responsibility regime which makes producers responsible for their products across their life cycle. And in the EU, we have, for example, a new directive on the management of waste and a new forced labour regulation coming into force in 2027. This will prevent the import, export or sale of any products tainted with forced labour at any point in the supply chain. Alongside this raft of new ESG rules affecting the supply chain, we have other key pieces of ESG legislation that are being revisited and revised, but with no clarity on where legislators will land and in what time frame. This includes the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, the EU's flagship corporate ESG reporting regime, and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or CS3D, which requires businesses to carry out human rights due diligence, codifying many of the core principles of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, known as the UNGPs. In this fast-moving and highly uncertain ESG regulatory environment, how should companies go about designing ESG-related clauses in supplier contracts? Structuring your contracts within the context of an overall sustainable sourcing strategy and approach can ensure leverage is used effectively and with an eye to the emerging legal and regulatory risk landscape. One way to minimise the impact from regulatory uncertainty is not to tie contractual provisions to specific regulatory obligations. Instead, you might consider bringing contractual provisions in line with the original voluntary codes or soft law, the internationally recognised framework of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UNGPs, as well as the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct, the OECD guidelines. These instruments, though, often solidified into hard law or mandatory law in various forms, including CS3D, are the original backbone of responsible business and stay consistent despite changes in legislation. For example, the OECD guidelines make clear that business enterprises should carry out human rights due diligence as appropriate to their size, the nature and context of operations, and the severity of the risks of adverse human rights. This can be reflected in commercial contracts, regardless of where the process of revising CS3D lands. There are also certain ESG requirements that can be reflected in contracts, regardless of the regulatory picture. These include policies and standards, the supplier's compliance with its own and its customers' policy standards and codes of conduct, reporting and audit. This includes maintaining records such as progress against targets, ESG reports, and specific customer audit rights. Personnel, such as dedicated training provisions, for example, in respect of climate science. Targets and KPIs, having continuous improvement plans and targets to reduce carbon footprint. And lastly, compliance. Compliance with ESG-related laws, regulations, standards and guidelines, as well as notification provisions for breaches within the supply chain. One specific topic to touch on is what sort of obligations are sensible to impose on suppliers. Here are some best practice tips that I use. Invest in key contracts and suppliers. Understand your suppliers' challenges in meeting best practice and help them. Include reporting measures with verifiable data points. No matter the jurisdiction, the ability to report, disclose, assess, and conduct due diligence is only as effective as the quality of the data and how it is managed. It is therefore important to have processes in place to maximise the data quality and accuracy. Consider tech solutions like AI and blockchain. Remember that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Use KPIs also to create incentives and enable remedial outcomes. And finally, where SMEs are in your supply chain, provide targeted and proportionate support and a balanced allocation of obligation and risk. Thank you for watching. Be sure to look out for other episodes in this series on supply chains, where we'll continue exploring the evolving landscape of responsible business.